and welcome to From Harm to Home, the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First podcast. My name is Louisa and I will be your host for this series, guiding you through the exciting and innovative world of the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First project. The project provides housing and long-term wraparound support for women with experience of long-term homelessness, multiple disadvantage and any form of violence against women and girls in Westminster in London. We are making this podcast to showcase some of the amazing partners and people involved in this project, to create a platform for the women accessing the project to talk about their experiences, and more generally to tell the world about how it works and what we have learnt along the way.
In this second episode of the podcast, our wonderful multiple disadvantage and Housing First lead at Standing Together Against Domestic Abuse, Hannah Brown, is going to be talking about part of her role, which focuses on the housing coordination for the Housing Partnership in the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First podcast, which is a really, really important role. And it's something we've been doing since the beginning of the project. So over to you, Hannah. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Right, I've got some questions for you about your role doing the housing coordination for the project. So first of all, can you just give us a bit of background and tell us how the housing element of the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First project works?
Yeah, so kind of one of the hardest barriers in any Housing First project, and really anything housing related, is actually finding the housing and finding suitable housing for people to live in that's affordable. So this was kind of the first element that was looked into when the setting up of the project began, which you know all about, of course. And that was kind of the first step. And what that was building a housing partnership. So we have kind of 6 active partners, housing partners. So that's Southern, Peabody, L&Q, Guinness, Sanctuary and Octavia. And what these do is they have a service level agreement with us to provide up to 3 properties per financial year of the project. And that's a service level agreement that we have that kind of gets reviewed every year. And it just really makes sure that we're getting the properties that we need. And it means that I'm not spending loads of time just sourcing lots of different properties. It's kind of, they come in when available, and the housing providers allocate certain properties to our project. Women are nominated for a property, and kind of we provide that basic information to housing providers. When a woman who's supported in the project expresses interest that they want to start looking into a property, I kind of collate that information and send that out to providers. And then when they have something that they think is suitable in the right area, they will send that through to us, and we will then do a bit of back and forth about whether it's appropriate. We do as well, one thing that we do ask for in our project is like an enhanced standard of letting. So neutral decoration, white goods and flooring. This is kind of recognising that the women that we are housing are destitute. And, you know, if we weren't providing this in our project, it'd likely take, you know, quite a bit of time to drum up the funds to be able to get out a flat with these things. It just means that the women that we are providing can move into a home rather than just a shell. It gives them the best start really to try and maintain the tenancy if it feels homely. So we do kind of advocate for that in our project, and we're very lucky that we have housing providers that will do that with us, and kind of recognise the need for that. But yeah, that's just a bit about kind of how the housing works, I guess.
That's really I think it's quite a unique way of providing housing for a Housing First project. I think Housing First projects, obviously, they will either potentially have access to social housing through the local authority if they're commissioned. They might use the private rented sector. But I think this partnership of housing providers is quite a unique aspect, I think, to the Housing First.
And also it's social rent levels that we are the properties are provided as, which I think is really important, that it is covered by housing benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. It is actually affordable, which is really important. Okay. Can you tell me a bit about your role? So what is the role of the housing coordinator in the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First project? What do you do day to day? How do you support the journey of a woman from nomination, from that point of nomination you were just talking about, to actually, sustaining and maintaining that tenancy?
Yeah, well, I guess as a housing coordinator, the job is kind of manifold. It's got lots of different little elements to it, and really the intention around it is to better streamline the project, take that pressure off the support workers as well, because then they have someone who will escalate housing issues, that's sourcing housing, that's keeping kind of the housing providers in check around their requirements with the SLA. So it really takes that pressure off the worker, who then doesn't have to think about that sort of thing. They can focus on the person they're supporting and their needs and helping them to get into a property, and any kind of issues that come up will come to me. I also kind of oversee the partnership, make sure it keeps running. I run partnership meetings with all the providers, kind of any issues that come up. I write the SLA, work on that with the housing providers. We do that as a partnership, and really just support the housing providers in anything Housing First related, whether that's upskilling staff, upskilling teams, just kind of raising that awareness of the project and like the cohort, and what needs to be different in supporting a Housing First client, and then also thinking about, how we can make Housing First better, how ours runs, kind of that general best practice, drafting things, making sure that kind of what we're doing is like we can replicate elsewhere, and kind of justifying the need for this role, because it really does make a difference with the housing providers, because they can escalate things to someone, and then the Solace team as well, and then just takes a bit of pressure off everyone in the project really, which is really beneficial.
So you're that point of liaison between the two.
Yeah, definitely.
And how it's interesting that there's strong partnership. How do you maintain that sense of partnership? So you say you have quarterly partnership meetings, and you also have one-to-ones. I suppose what makes that partnership unique?
Well, I guess, what that means is that there's a lot of transparency and accountability there. And that's like one of the, I think, benefits to having that partnership approach. So all of our housing providers pretty much provide the same thing. They're all coming across the same issues as well, whether that's, issues with funding around the project, if it's issues around certain cases that come up, and like kind of the difficulties in just Housing First in general. It is expensive, it's time consuming, we do have issues that come up, and it really is kind of that space where we can all talk about the issues and kind of work through them together. I do think that kind of transparency is so important, to be honest about what is going on, what difficulties we're having, whether that's Solace having issues, whether that's the housing providers having issues, or however we move forward. I think it's quite unique in that respect, as it is kind of teamwork that keeps it going. But I do think it's beneficial in keeping the project going, really, and getting that input from everybody, because seeing it as a partnership instead of, each, Solace just providing support and then the housing providers providing housing, and that's everyone, stays in their lane and just does what they need to do. I just think, working together, it makes it a lot more streamlined. It makes it a lot like people are accountable to each other. Everyone knows each other. I really think that helps build a better response, particularly when it comes to things like issues that come up, like if there's experiences of violence against women and girls in the property, or things like that. That kind of awareness and working together in partnership really helps to overcome them challenges that are faced. So I think I do think it is unique, but I think it's very beneficial to have that sort of response.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm going to come to you about, issues with tenancies. Just so tell me now, talk me through how you support. What do you do? And how do you support the journey of that woman from when she's nominated, kind of through the weeks, maybe being offered a property, viewing a property, and then kind of helping her, supporting her, working with Solace to support her to maintain that tenancy. What do you do along the way there?
So like what I do is I oversee that nominations process and the housing offers which come in. So any housing offers that come in to the project, they will come through me and we will kind of go through them. And again, any kind of nomination to look at housing. So that's when the Solace team are working with someone who says, I want to start viewing a property. They express that interest in starting to view and starting to move forward. They will fill out a nominations form that will come to me, and it will kind of say things like preferred area, property requirements, any kind of basic identified risks, just so that we can really try and make sure that the property is suitable. And what I do is I collate all of that information and send it out to the providers. So we keep track of everyone who's on the nominations list. So people who haven't yet found the property for them, and people who are new to that as well are added. When a property is then provided by the partnership, the Solace team and myself will discuss kind of the suitability, who might want to go view it, and kind of start to arrange that. So, for example, I'll make up a name to use in this. So recently we've been very lucky recently in this kind of last financial year. We've had quite a lot of property offers, which has been great. We've had like 6 or 7, I think, since March, which has been absolutely brilliant. For context, this is being recorded in October. As I realised this will come out in a year, in the new year. But yeah, so our client Lisa, so they have been in the project for around a year and a half. They've been supported in the project, and they have been on the nominations list for a while because they have been wanting to view property and thinking about that kind of move on. However, they have quite a few significant physical health needs, so require a ground floor flat with easy access. So it was really important on this that we were considering the right property, and ground floors a little bit harder to come by, so it did take a little bit longer on this one. But then we were offered a 1-bed ground floor flat, which was offered by one of the housing partners, and the nomination was put forward. And due to Lisa's kind of vulnerabilities, we did think it was appropriate to meet with the housing officer, with the lead at the housing partner's lead, myself and the support worker, just to discuss the suitability of that property and any known risks in the area. So I coordinated that meeting and popped it in, and we all met to discuss this property and this tenant in particular. And what the housing provider did let us know was that the previous tenant had been cuckooed in this flat, and that there were a couple of steps to get into the block, which is something that we needed to consider. It's also quite remote. It didn't kind of share any walls. So this was a conversation that we were able to have and talk through those risks. We know that Lisa is quite vulnerable. She has been vulnerable to exploitation in the past. However, one thing that we did kind of stress was that she has a very good relationship with her Housing First worker. She keeps in touch with her. She kind of lets them know of things that are going on in her life, any friends that she's making. She does rely quite a lot on her support, which is something that we felt would help support should there be any risk in that property. We do think we'd be made aware of it and we'd be able to take action. So after discussion, it was kind of believed that that property would suit Lisa. She was in that place where she would be able to cope in a flat like that. She does engage well, she seeks support, and she would kind of share that information with her Housing First worker for us to be able to manage that risk. So then we worked with the housing provider around that sign up. And one thing that we do kind of advocate for, and what I advocate for, is that we have that pre-viewing kind of requirements minimized as much as possible, on the basis that it's going to put in loads of barriers, that these are people who have experienced quite significant trauma, and often what they don't want to do is give a lot of information about their lives to people that they don't know for a flat that they might not even like, because we do give full choice in this project. You don't move down any list or anything like that. If you don't like the property, you can say no, basically. So we do try and minimize any kind of previewing requirements where we can, and often the housing providers kind of understand, because the housing first worker is going to be there to support. So usually that kind of helps us bypass that any risk that might be associated with the housing officer meeting someone that they don't know. So you can usually bypass that. It was a little bit difficult to support Lisa to a viewing. The housing officer did have to be quite flexible around this and rearrange a few times, but we just kept in that constant communication, tried to give as much notice as possible when viewing couldn't be held, but eventually we did manage to get Lisa to a viewing, and on the viewing she accepted the property. She was supported by sign up to the property. Again, kind of I advocated for reducing the kind of ID requirements to the minimum, so if photo ID and proof of income, rather than having to provide bank statements and proof of address and all of the other things all the other kind of bureaucracy that we that have to be provided, because that is such a huge barrier, and we work really closely with the housing providers around that. So Lisa was supported to sign up to the property, and then on move-in, we held kind of a welcome briefing with the housing officer, the solace worker, and myself. And in that, I was able to kind of brief the housing officer around the project, because we want to make sure that everyone is in the know about what to expect from Housing First. It's not your usual general needs tenancy, so we do kind of make that very clear from the start. We go through kind of the specifics of the project, the kind of cohort we're supporting, but also specifically to the person who's been put in that property and what kind of their needs are and requirements, and kind of start to build that trust and relationship early on. And it's also a chance for to seek advice on any kind of befriending services in the area that might be useful. Lisa expressed that she'd been feeling a bit lonely. She doesn't know the area that well, so it's a chance to discuss that, and kind of think about anything that might be wrong with the property, making sure she's got access to the letterbox, for example, and anything really that could come up. And then what we also do in that meeting is arrange for a 3-month review, just to come back together. And we call that kind of like a tenancy sustainment meeting, just to make sure that everything is going smoothly, that if there's anything that either side aren't aware of, that we can keep everyone in the know and just keep that kind of communication loop going, really, and continue to support Lisa around the tenancy. So that's kind of where we're at now. Lisa's settled into the property, and anything that does arise, we kind of know who to go to. We've got that relationship with the housing officer. The solace worker knows who they need to escalate things to. My kind of job there is to just streamline that whole process and make sure that things are being dealt with, escalated where possible. So yeah.
Thanks so much for that example. I think that really kind of brings what you do and what your role is in the process to light. And yeah, there's so many places where there could be communication could break down, or I can see how it takes having this role is beneficial to streamline and manage and ensure that communication and that transparency, about what to expect, is really key in that process as well. So it sounds like things went really well for Lisa, but what causes tenancies to fail or have issues, and what do you do in this case?
I guess the main kind of reasons that tenancies break down, particularly in our project. So our project is a violence against women and girls project, and often the kind of reason for breakdown is, perpetrator causing ASB in the property, or sometimes experiences of VAWG within the property, which mean that person has to flee. So they're really like the two things that stand out. I think all of the examples of tenancy breakdown while I've been in post have been due to those reasons. So kind of when there's examples of VAWG in the property, we will support the survivor to flee. So the Solace team will support the survivor to flee, seek temporary accommodation and whatnot. And then in that kind of period, I will work with the housing provider, making sure they're kept in the loop, seeing what options they have internally to be able to support with this, whether that's a management move, whether they have any contacts, whether they're able to put in like target hardening or things like that. I will work with the housing provider on that front, and the Solace team will work with the woman who's having to flee and make sure that everything's in place that way. And we will kind of have those regular reviews to keep coming back to see where we're at with things. And it might be that they end up back on the nominations list and they might choose to relinquish their tenancy. It might be that we work with the housing provider for them to go through a management move. It might be that they decide to relinquish their tenancy and go back into supported accommodation. We kind of, it goes whatever way the person wants it to, really. So that's kind of the first way that most of the properties that I've supported with, that's one of the reasons for tenancy breakdown. Kind of other side of that is when there's a perpetrator and they're causing quite significant ASB and putting that person's tenancy at risk. So this can be really challenging, and it involves a lot of joint up working between kind of myself, Solace team, and the housing provider to try and overcome and work around the situation and the relationship that they have. And what we try to do is hold regular case reviews to update on the information. We will try to kind of link in with the support of the perpetrator as well, and join up on that intervention. And kind of my role in that is coordinating those meetings, sending out actions, kind of holding people accountable, because I won't hold any of the actions myself, really, other than like that connection coordination. It will be for the housing provider to take action and the Solace team to take action, whether that's merit referrals, whether that's injunctions or anything like that, what we can do, really. And it's that teamwork approach. The one thing that is particularly kind of important to stress with these relationships in particular is that it's often a bit of a different approach, because they are quite long-standing relationship that are had between the couple. So we do try and kind of approach that slightly differently, because there's always that risk that they're just going to disengage. So in a previous case that we've supported with and we're still supporting with, it's still kind of ongoing due to the ASB of the perpetrator. Our client's tenancy was placed at a significant risk. We held multiple case conferences, including with the perpetrator's support team. Luckily, the perpetrator did have a bed space in supported accommodation, and we were able to work with their supported accommodation and make an agreement that 3 nights a week, the lady that we were supporting could go and stay there in a 24-hour staffed supported accommodation where there's people on hand if there was a situation that was to escalate. And kind of the intention behind that was that her flat then could be her respite space. She can go back to her flat, and because of the seriousness of the ASB that the perpetrator had caused, the housing provider made the decision to serve an injunction to stop him attending. And so he stopped coming to the property for that reason, and then she was spending a few nights there, and then she'd go back to her own flat, which worked to an extent, but when the injunction was in place, but that's not always going to be the case. But he would try and come back to the property on occasion. But that was kind of like a joint workaround. That could be quite a tricky situation to manage if the perpetrator has nowhere to go as well. Luckily, this perpetrator did have somewhere to go, but if they don't, it may result in the woman abandoning the property to sleep with him. So that's really something to consider carefully. Luckily, in this case, there were circumstances where that could be managed. So really, kind of my main role in that is coordinating meetings, planning that responses, making sure that each party's accountable, giving advice around that kind of VAWG response, and ensuring we continue to consider how we move forward with things, which could be a real challenge. It's difficult when housing providers have many of the tenants who they are also looking after and supporting, when there's one tenant and possibly a really awful perpetrator who's threatening other residents and really causing quite a scene. and just trying to balance that and thinking about how we can move forward to make it a better situation overall is challenging, but it's usually a work in progress, and just keep going, and sometimes it's a good result.
I can see again why your role is so important there, because that's such a tricky thing to balance. And I think the communication and the coordination of case conferences, etc., is so key for getting the best outcome for everyone in those scenarios. And yeah, it's definitely where a woman wants to flee. I mean, it's not straightforward, but I suppose maybe it is a bit more straightforward than these situations where you have women in ongoing relationships with abusive partners that, are constantly putting their tenancy at risk. And you've kind of got to try and work with that. That's tough. It's interesting to see how you do it. So finally now, what do you think housing professionals, whether in lettings or whether they're housing officers directly liaising with women or the Solace team, what do they need to know to provide the best possible service to the women accessing the project, do you think?
I think an understanding of multiple disadvantage is absolutely crucial. The lettings teams and the housing providers need to understand the cohort supported in Housing First, why they are in Housing First. It's because they haven't been able to get on with any other housing pathway. And that this is going to be their first kind of permanent home in years. And that in itself is really tricky. These people come with a lot of different factors, which are going to be a real struggle when put into a general needs tenancy. So it's really understanding how that kind of presents, the kind of thing to expect, but also understanding that they have this support worker who has this time and freedom because they have this short, like really small caseload to provide that really intensive support. And that they really are kind of the person to go to if you have any concerns, that you have this support. You're not dealing with this on your own. You have this support worker who has that space to be able to support you as a housing provider in helping this person to sustain their tenancy. Kind of at the lettings stage, we need to be considering, risk in the block, whether it would be appropriate to place someone there who's experienced kind of severe and multiple disadvantage. How can we best manage them to be able to thrive in this environment? Is this the right environment for someone? Are we setting them up to fail, or is this, somewhere where we believe that they are going to be able to thrive? There needs to be that understanding of trauma, how this is a huge change in a person's life, and kind of that change is going to be challenging. As I said, like it's probably the first permanent home that they've had in really, really long time, like sometimes like 10-15 years that this would be their home. That's a really big adjustment to make for anyone. So that is settling in. It's going to be really challenging, particularly if it's a new area, they're having to engage in new support. Luckily, the Housing First worker is going to be consistent, but drug and alcohol treatment, mental health support, things like that, that's probably all going to change. And it's a real big change that this person's going through, and that's going to throw up challenges in itself. So even, if that kind of period as well is not going to be linear, it's not going to be smooth sailing recovery, everything's going to go right. It will be really like bumpy, it'll be hit and miss, it'll have its ups and it'll have its downs, but you have this Housing First worker that's going to be able to kind of be there to support the whole time. Yeah, there kind of needs to be an understanding that of the types of challenges faced by the individuals, and that they don't go away as soon as they're popped into a property. They're not suddenly going to be clean from alcohol or drug use. They're going to likely still have a perpetrator, which I discussed in the last bit. That perpetrator might have insecure housing. You might not just be getting this person, you might also be having someone else move in as well. they might still struggle to engage with the support around mental health and kind of acknowledgement of the process of recovery. And yeah, thinking about how we can all work together to best support this person. And yeah, just really relying on the support of that Housing First worker who knows this person very well, who is equipped to deal with all of these kind of risks and that are going to pop up. And thinking about what you can do to help with that process. So what local support services do you know that we can link in with? Mental health befriending services, drug and alcohol services. Is there any funds available, welfare funds or anything like that, where we can look to help fund soft furnishings to really make this a home, make this somewhere that they can live, that they're proud of, really kind of build that home environment. Just yeah, really being mindful of the challenges faced, but thinking about how we can help overcome them with the support that's provided.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think that's giving any housing officers or lettings teams or any other housing professionals a bit of food for thought about the Housing First model, about the needs of this group of women as well. And yeah, something to think about in terms of how they can and how they should be responding and how they can provide the best possible service to this really vulnerable group of women. Okay. So thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us today, and thank you for all of your work on the housing coordination for the Westminster VAWG Housing First project. Hannah's actually going to be leaving us for an illustrious career in the law. So yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for all of the development. The role has developed so much since you came into post a couple of years ago, and you've really made it what it is today. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening, and see you for the next episode where Hannah and I will be speaking with Bree Attrill, safeguarding lead for one of our brilliant housing partners, Southern Housing Group, who will tell us what it's like partnering with the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First service and why it's important to them. If you would like to find out more about the Westminster VAWG Housing First project, please visit our website at www.standingtogether.org.uk. This podcast is written by me, Louisa Steele, and produced and edited by the amazing Holly Ringrose. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with the podcast, you can follow us on the Multiple Disadvantage and Homelessness team channel on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening.